Okay, so let's start with a moment's silence followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So my name's Tim, I'm an alcoholic, and I've visited and been a member of various fellowships over the years. For those who like dates and figures, my sobriety date is the 24th of July 1993. And so hooray for AA and hooray for Al-Anon and hooray for the higher power. If you want more details about my alcoholism, listen to the tapes from yesterday. Stuff will come out today as well about that, but we're here to talk about the traditions and about the concepts. And there are two approaches to the traditions and the concepts. There's a very strict approach. It's just like with the big book. There are some people that say AA is what is in the big book. If it's not in the big book, it's not AA. We're not interested. And there are people, and I say hello to them, but I don't go for coffee. I wouldn't want a doctor that hasn't read a basic textbook on anatomy, but I wouldn't want a doctor who has only read a basic textbook on anatomy. And it's the same for me with the AA literature, that there is the text and I don't deviate from that, but there are extra layers of truth which I believe have been revealed over the last 70 years, is it, since the big book was written? 1939. So some mathematician can work that out. I think 70 years. 80 years, whatever. So with the traditions, there is a strict approach, and then there is looking for the spiritual principles buried in the traditions and the concepts, and taking those principles into my life, into my relationships. In religions, you get this argument between the people that like things to be legalistic and literal. So if any of your ancestors are from Lithuania, this may be the case for you. And then there are people that look for mystical truth beyond that. And this argument happens in AA and in other fellowships as well. So anything I say is just my experience and my opinion. You're going to disagree with some of it, that's fine. We don't need to figure out who's right and who's wrong. Because I change my mind on a regular basis as well. That's one of... I got some advice before coming here about doing a traditions workshop, and the person who has been doing recovery workshops for 40 years said, be flexible. Which means I get to change my mind. And if anything I say is helpful, that's wonderful. If it's not helpful, don't go crazy about it. Or write some inventory. It'll give you a chance to call your sponsor for the first time this year. So this will be a service that I may provide, is making you so angry you actually call your sponsor. So I'm going to do the legal stuff about the traditions first, and then the crazy stuff, and then I'm going to do the legal stuff on the concepts, and then the crazy stuff on the concepts. And we'll see where we end up. We may not get through all of it. And if anyone has any question at any point, raise one hand or two hands or wave a piece of paper or dance or do something to get my attention, and I want you to be participating. So with tradition 1, I'm just going to... Elisheva, do we have someone primed to read traditions out? Well, if someone could prepare that for later, I'll read out the first tradition in English, and I'm going to read the first tradition in the short form, and then the first tradition in the long form. They're totally different. So in the short form, 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. Each member of Alcoholics Anonymous, this is the long form, each member of Alcoholics Anonymous is but a small part of a great whole. AA must continue to live, or most of us will surely die. Hence our common welfare comes first, but individual welfare follows close afterward. And because it's connected, I'm going to read tradition 5 as well. And I'm going to read the long form here. Each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And before I go on, could you put your hands up if you've gone through the traditions with your sponsor? Okay. Put your hands up if you've discussed the traditions at your group. Okay. Good. So there's some experience. You've thought about the traditions at some level already. This is a good thing. Has anyone read anything about the traditions beyond the basic AA literature? And okay, a little. So there's a little bit. There's a lot of material out there. I can provide links afterwards to some files online which might help or might not. What I want to do is tell some stories about how I've seen Tradition 1 work in my experience in AA. About 11 years ago, I became very militant about AA, that there is a one right way to do it, and it's in the big book, and if you disagree with me, you are wrong, and I need to tell you that you're wrong. Okay. Now that was what was going on inside. There was a nice chocolate coating on the outside, but on the inside, I was right, you were wrong. And in my home group, which was not a big book group, this was before my current home group started, there was no unity within the group, none. There was a bunch of people who liked the big book. There was a bunch of people who didn't. When a big book person shared, 3 people from the other side of the room went for a cigarette. You choose the right moment. What better moment than when the person you disagree with is sharing? This is when you go to the lavatory. This is when you go for a cigarette. And the 2 sides were not talking to each other. From different social groups as well in society, there was a clear social divide there. And we had a group conscience we had a group inventory, and we asked ourselves, what is the primary purpose of this group? And although it says in here, each group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. We had to say, what is our message? If you don't know what the message is, you don't know what you're carrying. And some people raised their hands, and my friend Ian raised his hand and said, the message is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous as contained in the first 164 pages of the Big Book. Good legal training. This friend of mine went to a yeshiva in Jerusalem, so he knows how to say the right thing. He's read the answers at the back of the book. And then someone else shared and said what she thought the primary purpose of the group was. And she said the primary purpose of this group is to create a safe space for alcoholics to come and share what is going on with them this week. And it suddenly became clear why this group was not functioning. We did not have unity because we didn't have a common purpose. And the rest of the group conscience was a disaster, because if you haven't got a basic starting point, what is there then to discuss? Does anyone have any guesses as to what happens next? What do you think? We split, exactly. But we didn't do it formally. That requires lawyers. It's very difficult. So some of us just left because we were the Big Book people left, not because we wanted to we were the ones who had joined that group. The group was fine for 20 years. We came along with our blue books, caused trouble, made enemies, so we were the ones that got to leave. And we're now friends with the people who couldn't stand us. So of those who are still sober, we're all on good terms. The reason we're on good terms is because we're in different groups. And what enables AA to stay a single unified fellowship is the fact that we don't have to agree on anything between groups, except if it affects AA as a whole. So this is tradition 4. I'll come into this. And there are websites there's a website in the UK where people post anonymously reports about AA meetings which they think are doing it wrong and which are harming people. And this is, by the way, American friends of mine use this website to find good meetings in the UK, because if it's listed on there, it probably means they're using the Big Book, they carry a strong message, they have strong sponsorship. Fine. But our group my home group appeared on this website about 10 months ago. And there was just a crazy anonymous report, completely untrue, no facts were correct. But it's fine. They can do what they do over there. Other groups can do what they do. And when I go to a group which is not a Big Book group and which is not a step group, if they ask me to share, I will find a way of sharing my experience, strength and hope from the Big Book without using the phrase Big Book, because people are allergic to it. There is always a way of administering the medicine without the patient realizing. Like when nurses give vaccinations to children, they do it in a way that the child doesn't notice. So to create unity, to maintain unity in AA, in my home group, we're clear, we're open, we talk about how we do things, which is Big Book, 164 pages. When we go elsewhere, In other groups, I respect their group conscience. If they want someone just to tell their story, I will go and tell my story. I'll deliver the active substance of AA. Drugs have active substances. I'll deliver the active substance in a way that does not disrespect other people's group conscience. I have no desire to change anyone else's group. So we've got good relations with all of the groups around us where we are in London. Some big book groups in the UK have terrible relations with all of the groups around them. Because when a person thinks they're superior, everyone else can smell it. And when a group thinks it's superior, everyone else can smell it. So I've got to respect that other groups are doing things the way they're doing things because that is their conscience. A second thing that I want to say about Tradition 1 is this idea of putting common welfare first. And I mentioned a little bit about this yesterday. Unfortunately, very occasionally, there are individuals who are sexually predatory in AA. And it looks on the surface to be innocent. It's just a man talking to a woman, but there is sometimes intent behind it. And in my group, we are very, very protective of newcomers. We know those of us who have that as our home group, we know who the strangers are. We're there every week. We know who's safe. Everyone at my home group currently is safe. But when someone isn't, we're incredibly careful and we confront the person clearly with no negotiation. And the instruction is, you need to stop because we've had complaints. We're not going to investigate. We're not going to have a court case in the group conscience about this. But if you've been doing something, you need to stop. If you've done nothing, we apologise for passing this on. Yeah.
Who goes, in practicality, who are the people who would approach that person?
Find someone big, or maybe 2 people. You need 4 people. One person to go and have the conversation. 3 people watching for trouble. If all 4 go, this looks like I don't know, lynch mob. Do you know what a lynch mob is? Yeah. It looks like an attack. If it's one person who goes, it's an ordinary, quiet conversation. No one else in the group knows what's happening. So you respect people's privacy. But you get 3 people who are big, who are able to take the person out if there is an argument. And it's the same if someone is drunk and causing trouble. We quietly move them out of the room, and there are always in my group people watching for trouble because we want the group to be safe. And by the way, with the offender or potential offender or the drunk person, we take them out and we sit with them and say, you can still be part of AA. You're not being blocked from AA. You can't go in there. But you can be part of AA. And we will say, do you want to talk about what's going on? And with a drunk person, maybe there is some kind of message that can be carried. So you don't send them to the door, lock the door, go back in. We sit with people. It doesn't happen often. And part of the reason for this is whether it's the drunk person or the person whose behaviour has no boundaries, if they are ever going to get well, that group needs to continue existing. And so anything which threatens that group is a threat even to the person who is really unwell. So it's not unkind to do it, because the common welfare includes them. If it's for the common welfare, it is for their individual welfare. Some more things on unity, because I think tradition 1 is so important. There are groups, AA groups in the UK, where there is a dress code, where the men have to wear certain clothes and the women have to wear certain clothes, and if they don't, there are words. There are conversations that are had in corridors. My group does not do this, because when newcomers come into our group, we want them to identify with the people in the room, so we want the people to come as they are. So does this mean people dress strangely and inappropriately? Absolutely. But you look the other way, you avert your eyes, and eventually people get well and start to dress appropriately. But we do not impose this as the rule, because we want everyone to belong. Yeah?
A lot of people in the room are sex addicts.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that applies the same way. Like if that's something, I don't know if you can answer it, just if you want to say to those people who are coming in here because they have sex addiction problems, they're let people come as they are, look the other way.
So I'm going to, when people make comments, I'm going to repeat for the purposes of the tape. You've got a different issue there with the SA meetings, and if the group needs to have a rule about dress to protect common welfare, I believe I would support that. But the general principle is not forcing conformity, and in my home group, we encourage people to share on the content of the Big Book. So when my home group, which is for reference the Brick Lane Big Book study on a Saturday in London, we read 2 pages, 3 pages, and then we invite people to share on the passage. We have some people with mental health issues. We have some people with personality disorders. I'll let you work out whether I am one of those people. I may or may not be. But people share some interesting material which has nothing to do with AA, which has nothing to do with recovery. Now, if the person is my sponsee, I'm going to have a conversation and say, you need to cut that out. You need to look after the common welfare and share in a way which could benefit the room, and not use this as a waste disposal pipe. This is not where you get rid of the negative emotion. You have 23 hours a day to do that. You have the other days of the week. In London, you have plenty of meetings where the topic of the meeting is what I think about what I feel. No one says this is the topic, but if you listen, this is the topic. So I'll say to sponsees, if you need to tell 30 people how you feel, I'll give you a list of addresses, but you're not going to do it here. But we don't, as a group, impose that conformity. And I have a sponsor at the moment who is a big book thumper. This is the technical term for someone who beats the big book like it's a Bible. Now, he's not really aggressive about the big book, but he's very devoted to it. My previous sponsor was completely different, and I got as much from the previous sponsor as from this sponsor. The previous sponsor, who was called Brian, said that to preserve the unity of a group, you need to build a very strong fence around the group. I'll explain what that means in a minute. You build a very strong fence. If you're going to tame wild horses, so to bring wild horses under control, you can't do it if there is no fence. They need to run around, but they need to be safe, and they need to be safe from harming other people. And how our group has a strong boundary is when people come in to the grounds. It's in a school. They come into the grounds of the school. There are 6 people there to greet them, to direct them into the room. The meeting starts on time. The meeting ends on time. Tea and coffee are ready 45 minutes in advance. The literature table is out 45 minutes in advance with someone sitting there selling the literature. All of the strong group members we look out for anyone who is new. And if we don't recognize them, we go and introduce ourselves to them, and they often say, well, I'm 30 years sober, I'm visiting from so-and-so, but they might be new. You can't always tell. Sometimes, the craziest person in the room is actually 30 years sober. Sometimes newcomers have got a really good shell. So we make sure that everyone is spoken to. This is the creation of the strong fence. We leave one of the doors unhooked so that if people go in and out to go to the lavatory during the meeting, the door doesn't bang, so it doesn't disturb the meeting. We have a clear format. It's very organized. It's very structured. But as soon as the sharing starts, anything goes. There is no policing. There's a crazy person who I adore, who comes 1 week out of 3. He shares first. He shares about who he's currently upset about. And then he leaves for 45 minutes, walks around the garden, comes back in. We as a group have no opinion on what he does during the meeting. We have a bell as well. We have at 3 minutes of sharing, the bell goes off and you stop sharing. But even if someone goes on, the police don't pounce. So there's a strong structure, but the wild horses are allowed to run around. And what Brian said, if the wild horses can't run around, if people don't feel free to share whatever is inside them, the craziest people will not come to your meeting, and where are they going to get well? So we've got to have a structure which allows people who are broken in unexpected and revolting ways to be with us. I went to was that a question or a hair adjustment? Oh, it was a question. Okay, tell me.
One time in my meeting, someone shared, they shared that they were sexually abusive, that morning. Is that let that wild horse run? He was crazy, so Jesus took on all these different things, and then he said people are really offensive and scared.
There is one exception. So the question for the tape was about when it basically, is there a line that is crossed where intervention is necessary? And I've experienced in another group someone who had Is there a problem with the... You're all right, okay. There was someone who was mentally ill and was talking about all sorts of crazy stuff, but then started to mention when you look around the room, you could see particularly some of the women were getting very tense and very nervous. If someone shares aggressively about someone else in the room, or about another group, or just aggressively generally, then the chair of the meeting will interrupt and say, could you please bring your sharing back to experience, strength and hope on the passage that we are discussing today. And if they don't, the chair will say, thank you for sharing, would someone else like to share? And then everyone is waiting for that instruction. Someone else says, my name's Susan and I'm an alcoholic. 100 people say, hello Susan. That earlier sharer is done. But that happens once every 5 years. But there's strange sharing every week. What we do, however, is those of us who care about our group lead by example. So if we think there's just too much crazy sharing, well, you share first, and then someone else shares next, and someone else shares next, to bring the sharing back on track. Rather than punishing or shaming, which doesn't help. Because in my experience, punishment and shame increase someone's separation from God. So it's the worst thing to do with someone who is behaving badly, is to use shame as a tool. Not everyone in AA has learned this. I haven't always learned this. I was brought up in a very shaming environment in many ways, and that tool accidentally gets used. I'm not paying attention to what I'm saying, and I realise I'm using shame or trying to induce guilt. I even heard a speaker on a tape a few weeks ago saying, if you are not taking active part in every part of your life because of guilt and low self-worth, then shame on you. So doing the exact opposite of what you should do if you want someone to grow. And one last thing, this touches on another tradition, but we had a question in a group conscience 6 months ago. We have a meeting every week, but once a month we have a workshop on big book topics, which is open to anyone from any fellowship. And we have 3 speakers, and anyone can come. And it divided the group in two, because the question that came up was, shall we open the meeting afterwards to non-alcoholics? Shall we open all of the meetings to non-alcoholics? Some people were super in favour, some people were super against. And the room was divided down the middle. And this is a threat to group unity. But what we do is we apply Concept 12. So there is a principle in Concept 12 of discussion and vote and substantial unanimity, which means almost unanimous. Almost everyone agrees. And I'm a conference delegate for AA in Great Britain and Europe, English-speaking Europe. And we have votes all through the conference. And almost all of the votes, there are 110 voting members. Almost every vote is passed with 104, 106, 108 there are only 1 or 2 votes, or maybe 5 or 6 votes against. Technically, you can let a vote through on a major issue with 3/4, but you've just alienated a quarter of the room. So we want to find out, with the quarter of the room that voted against, why are you voting against this? Why is this so important to you? And we encourage people after we have voted to express a minority opinion, which is concept 5. And if anyone in the room wants to re-vote, we re-vote. And another principle is, if you haven't got unanimity, you haven't finished discussing it. So we're just not going to make a decision this month. It goes back to next month. This discussion went on for 6 months. I think it was 6 months from first idea, do we open the meeting, to the final result. We couldn't get agreement. So we invited all group members to submit a written opinion. So each person wrote an opinion about what they thought the group should do and why. We took the names and anything identifying the person out of the contributions. So this is the practice of Tradition 12, anonymity. It's the principles that people are talking about. Who cares who said it? We don't care who said it, we care what they're saying. We put it into a single document and we sent it out and gave people 1 month to read and discuss. And I'm going to bring in Tradition 2. So Tradition 2 is about God speaking through the conscience of the room, which means that when I vote in my group, I'm not voting for me, I'm not voting on my behalf, I'm voting on behalf of the group. So my vote has to take into account the views of the people I disagree with. And we finally got to a position, I think we got 85 or 90% in favour. And our solution is such a lawyer's solution. The subtle change was the meeting after the workshop is now open. So we have the workshop, the people at the workshop can stay for the meeting, doesn't matter what fellowship they're in, but they can't share. So only AA members can share. So we have primary purpose maintained. We're carrying the message to other fellowships as well if they want to come along. And people come from 4 or 5 different fellowships. So we found a solution that everyone is happy with. And to preserve unity, when we've discussed something in my group and we've made a decision, we don't touch the decision until everyone has forgotten the argument. So we don't immediately reopen it a month later or 2 months later. And in the AA National Conference every year, if a question is discussed, we cannot discuss the same question for another 3 years. And by the time 3 years have passed, all of the delegates are new. There are no delegates still in place. So you never get the same people discussing the same question on behalf of the fellowship. Because a really common problem, and this will kill groups quicker than anything, is you have a discussion, you have a decision, it's 55-45. The people who were 55 cheering and balloons. The people who are in the 45, the next week they get all their friends to come along. They now have another group conscience, or you wait until people are on holiday and then you have the group conscience. And I've seen groups go back and forth on the same issue, and it will kill the group. because there is no unity. Does anyone have any tradition 1 questions? Yeah.
6 people waiting outside. Why are there 6 people waiting outside?
Greeters. So when people, I don't know if it's maybe it's not even a tradition here for people to do that. But we in England, you always have a greeter, someone who greets people coming in at the front. So if they're new, that's when we can find out if they're new. We can say, if you haven't been before, there are the loos, this is where the tea is, this is where the meeting is, don't smoke in here.
Like that's a job?
Yes.
Job given out?
Yes.
Service position?
Yes. So we have 3 male greeters. I think it's 3. The numbers have changed over time. 3 male greeters, 3 female greeters, because at any one time, 2 greeters are distracted with other conversations. So the men greet the men, the women greet the women, and we have people who are somewhere in between who greet everyone. It's an interesting group because friends of mine in Plymouth go to a very, very strong group. It has 70 or 80 people. It's the strongest, very organised, almost military. All the men in long trousers, all the women in dresses, or at least long skirts. It's an AA meeting, it's not an SA meeting. I was going to say, what was I saying about greeting? And that was it. And at that meeting, it's 90% men. And at super organised meetings in London, the ones where everything is tightly controlled, where people can only share if they're invited, and invited to share by the chair. So at this meeting, you put your hand up, but the chair picks who shares. My experience, I bet there are exceptions. So for anyone listening on the tape, you don't need to send me a postcard about your group. But at those meetings which are super organised, super controlled, men love it. Women hate it. And my group is around 55-60% women. Lots of young people. Lots of people that do not fit in anywhere. So we have straight people, we have gay people, we have people who are confused, we have transsexuals, we have Muslims, we have Hindus, we have people from all religions, we have members of the ultra-Orthodox community from North London who are not alcoholics, but they say they have a desire to stop drinking, so we're not going to argue. They started to come at our invitation to the workshop. They're members of SA. They become very good friends of ours. We had to ask the question, are you an alcoholic? And one of them said, and this is tradition 3 in action. We said, do you have a desire to stop drinking? He says, I have a desire to stop drinking. And the questioning stopped there. We know that he's not an alcoholic in the way we would understand it from the Big Book. But at coffee one day, we asked him, do you think you're an alcoholic? He said, I identify with everything in the Big Book. The characters, the people described, that's me. I'm not going to argue with his interpretation of the Big Book. I don't own the program. I don't own the Big Book. If his interpretation is that he's an alcoholic, good luck. And he's a member of the group. So there's a line in the Big Book, we are people that normally would not mix. And boy, are we people that normally would not mix. We go to a restaurant afterwards. Sometimes 45, 50 people have been at the restaurant. And gone to different restaurants at different times because as the group has got bigger, the restaurants can't, so we've had to move restaurant. The staff of the restaurant they can't understand how are these. There are some ultra-Orthodox Jews here next to the transsexuals having an animated, friendly conversation. This shouldn't be happening, and there's just a lot of love and tolerance and respect in there. Any other questions about tradition 1?
I don't know if it's related to what you were speaking. I don't know where you're holding with the traditions, but because I walked in late. But how do you, like, if I'm part of a group that in our business meetings, like if there is that 25%, 75% overlap, how do you technically, I guess, intervene or whatever, even if you're not the secretary, so that it could be a fair chance? I don't think that our group is like so strong in terms of I don't know what the rules are called, but I don't know if that's the right wording, but whatever the case, I just don't know how to implement that to make our group more fair.
Okay, so when you've got one of those borderline cases where it's 75% but some people are still upset, what do you do? It's very simple. We want to listen to them, and we let them share for as long as they want to share about why they're upset. And sometimes you see people go, oh, now I understand. And I've seen votes change. Oh, another thing as well, we keep things as they are unless pretty much everyone wants it to change. So the vote, you word the vote, the question you're voting on, in favour of change. You don't word it backwards, otherwise you end up changing with a small majority sometimes. So change things only very slowly and with great caution. And this is another idea to keep the group very strong, is to avoid rapid, hasty decisions Bill W. talks about in the concepts. And this is an aspect of tradition too. So the group conscience has to be informed, which means that each individual has to be informed by their conscience themselves. They have to be listening to the voice of God within them before they can contribute to the discussion. That's the idea. And there is some spiritual ideas in concept. I was going to be linear. I'm no longer going to be linear. I'm just going to go wherever the conversation is going. So if you want things to be tradition 1, tradition 2, tradition 3, maybe get someone else next year. So an idea about the concepts. So concept 1, I'm going to read out concept 1. Oh, yes, if you can read concept 1, that would be helpful.
Concept 1?
Yeah. You get that ready in case I ask for more. I'll just read it out from here. Final responsibility and ultimate authority for AA World Services should always reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. So the spiritual idea that someone shared with me is that in the universe there is a collective consciousness, which is the higher power. And it's the higher power who is in charge. An AA member who's now died, his nickname was Spiritual Paul. This is how you knew that he was spiritual. His nickname was Spiritual Paul. I did a step 5 with him once, and he said, "Who were the founders of AA?" And I thought, well, this is a dumb question. Well, it's Bill W. and it's Dr. Bob. He said, wrong answer. The founder of AA was God. The literature says they were the co-founders of AA. There's a difference. So, who's in charge of my home group? God. There is a collective consciousness. And then it talks about, this is concept 2. Are you ready with concept 2?
Yeah, the General Service Conference.
Yeah.
The General Service Conference of AA has become, for nearly every practical purpose, the active voice and the effective conscience of our whole society and its world of general.
Okay, so you've got that consciousness, the higher power, on another plane in heaven. And you've got to bring that heaven down to earth. There has to be a channel for that spirit to descend to the material plane. And the access point, the way a room will have an access point to the internet, the access point is conscience. And that conscience can be the individual conscience, and then those individual consciences merge and become a single group conscience. So the group conscience meeting at my home group, we have it twice a year. Major questions of policy and finance get discussed twice a year at group conscience meetings. We have business meetings in between. Every month we have business meetings to deal with practical matters. If you want to make a big change, it'll have to wait. So that conscience, it has to be an informed group conscience. The danger with group conscience meetings is they can be like general elections, where the group conscience becomes like a ballot box where each person puts their individual vote, having come to their view on their own without talking to other people and without talking to their higher power. And this is why our decision-making process is horribly slow, because we want to keep reminding people, you need to listen to your conscience. You need to become part of a single consciousness in the group. And then that group expresses itself as a single voice. And it's a completely different way than decisions are made in general elections. Question?
Yeah. Is the point of the traditions and the concepts just to keep unity in AA? Or I feel like the way you're, or is there some, is there something, as you said, like more spiritual, more like, is it a learning process? Because it's so involved, and there's so many, it's getting to the point where it's sounding so involved, and there's so much details.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is this just supposed to be a way to run the group and keep it, I'm not even sure where we're trying to keep it? Or, so I guess there's two questions. What's the goal of the traditions and the concepts?
That's a good question.
For the group, and what's, I guess, the goal for the individual?
So, what is the point of the traditions? What is the point of the concepts? They're complicated. Do we need this? If so, why? How many people have heard of the organization, the Washingtonians? Like, a few people have. There was an organization very like AA in the, I think, late 1840s, somewhere in the middle of the 19th century in America, where the basic principle was the same: sobriety with alcoholics, helping alcoholics. And they reached, I understand, over 100,000 members, but then they disintegrated, the organization disintegrated and ceased to exist in a number of years. And over the first 15 years or so of AA, lots of groups that were started died. And because the groups died, people died. It's very interesting. When you read Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, very interesting book. I find it hard to read. I can never get through the whole book. That's now on tape, so everyone now knows I cannot get through the whole book in one go. So if you struggle with it, that's fine. It talks about AA starting in Norway, and it quotes the number of AA groups in the city of Bergen in Norway. It's on the far west coast. From memory, it's something like 17 groups. And this was writing about the 1950s, I think. I looked up how many groups there are in Bergen now. There are fewer AA groups in Bergen now than there were in the 1950s. Just because a fellowship is doing well at a particular point in time does not mean it is going to continue. Nothing is guaranteed. So, over the first few years of AA, we found out, the fellowship found out what works, what doesn't work, what is going to help a group survive, what is going to kill a group, what helps AA remain unified as a fellowship, what causes problems. But the traditions are principally about how the groups function. The best description I heard, and I heard it from I think it was the Glasgow delegate on my committee at conference. She said, the steps are here to stop us killing ourselves. The traditions are here to stop us killing each other. And the concepts are here to stop us killing everyone. It's the same thing but on different scales. So the point of the steps, in my experience, is to establish a channel to a higher power so that I am not in charge of my life. The purpose of the traditions is to make sure that God is in charge of the group. It's not the alcoholics. You do not want me and my friends running a group ourselves. It would be my best friends in AA are very organised, and there would be a group of 3 members, just us, if we had our way. We want to make sure that God is in charge of the group. And why do we have the concepts? That's a different topic altogether. The reason the concepts exist is because for the first few years of AA, AA was run by Bill W. and by Dr. Bob. When they had a question, they would go to Bill. If they didn't like the answer, they would go to Bob. If they hated that answer, they would go back to Bill. So they would go to the founders. And there was a board of trustees after a few years that looked after lots of AA's affairs at national level. But there was no link between the fellowship as a whole and the trustees who were running AA's affairs. And so the purpose of the concepts the purpose of the concepts was to create a structure which puts God in charge of the whole fellowship of AA. That's what it's there for. So you've got God in charge of the individual as a result of the steps, God in charge of the group as the result of the traditions, God in charge of the fellowship as a result of the concepts. Now, I don't want to give a legal lecture on the concepts. I can give you the names of people who will do that. What I will do is tell a story about how the concepts worked in a particular job that I do in AA. So one of the things that I do is I'm on a committee which is a committee of the Board of Trustees of AA. AA in the United Kingdom is a fellowship of 4,500 groups. Some talk to each other, some don't. That's the fellowship. But there are some things that need to be done at national level. So we print literature at national level. We have a telephone office in London. You're right. Yeah. We have a telephone office in London. We have a big office in York with some employees. We have, what else do we do? The board also helps establish AA in sub-Saharan Africa and in Eastern Europe. So we've helped set up AA in Bulgaria, in Ukraine, in different countries. There are fellowship magazines. There are questions that AA needs to decide at national level as well. One of them, there is new law in the United Kingdom about how society protects vulnerable people within the society. It's called safeguarding. And the legislation is new. You all right? Okay. The legislation is new and it's complicated. And how are we going to apply this within AA when other organisations say we've got people who are mentally ill, we've got people with post-traumatic stress disorder, we've got women who've been the victims of sexual violence. We want to send people to AA. Is it safe? How can you prove to us it's safe? This is a question which we need to address at national level. So, in order to give guidelines for the whole fellowship. So, we've got the fellowship on one hand, and then we've got a non-profit organisation which runs 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, with various different services. So, for instance, when people contact AA in the UK, they can go to the website and chat with someone instantly in a little chat box. We need people to run that. Now, we need to make sure that God is in charge of the chat function on the website. We need to make sure that God is in charge of the safeguarding policy. We need to make sure that God is in charge of how those offices are run. How are we going to do that? So the basic system is this. The fellowship comes together once a year with its elected delegates who can only serve for 3 years. Once you've done your 3 years, you can never, ever become a delegate again. So it's once only. And this is tradition 9, the idea of rotation, different leaders at different times. And they meet at a conference once a year. So this is concept 1 and concept 2 coming together. So concept 1 means that we want the whole fellowship to be listening to God about how to answer questions. And we want those ideas to be expressed in one room all at the same time. So we have a national conference, and those delegates have spent 6 months listening to all of the AA groups in their area. And the conference has got a set of questions that it needs to ask. And these questions produce recommendations to the charity. This is what we want you to do this year. And the way I consider the concept is that God has the ultimate authority. God is ultimately in charge. But God needs human beings to do things in order for God's will to become real in the world. So God's will goes from the individual conscience of me as an AA member at my group, who we tell our GSR, our General Service Representative, what we think about an issue. The General Service Representative meets with all of the other General Service Representatives and tells the delegates, this is what the groups in London think. And then the delegate tells the other regions. So I would, as a delegate, I meet with the other regions and we discuss our topics. And eventually the fellowship votes through the 110 delegates. And we come up with a list of recommendations to the board. And so this authority starts with the higher power, goes through the GSR to the region, to the delegates, and then it goes through to the General Service Board, who then have to implement something. And one of the things that I got asked to do, we got a question from the British Army about whether we could do posters for Alcoholics Anonymous for soldiers who were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So because 2/3, I understand 2/3 of soldiers with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, also have alcohol problems. I got this statistic from a charity which helps veterans. Now, this poster got designed by me and some friends on the subcommittee. So you've got the fellowship, the conference, the board of trustees of the charity, and they get to have subcommittees to do the actual work. So the board only meets 6 times a year. They have to have people to do the actual work. So my authority to produce the poster came from God, through the groups, through the region, through the conference, through the board member on my committee. Tim, can you design a poster? I've never designed a poster in my life. I designed a poster. And this poster then got distributed to the whole of AA for comments, and the poster got redesigned, and eventually a version got passed by conference, and now that poster is in every single army base in Great Britain. So this was where a little idea comes in. It doesn't matter where the idea comes into the fellowship, but an idea can come from a group. An idea can come from the board. It can come from anywhere. It can come from out. This idea came from outside AA. But it gets fed into the structure, and there is a process for taking care of it, and we go from the idea through to the execution. And the whole time, when we presented the final poster to the army, we could say the whole of AA in Great Britain is in favour of this. You can trust it. Which preserves the unity. Now, we make mistakes in AA, but that's the basic idea of the concepts. I'm thinking we're past the time, Elisheva, for a short break. How about we do 10 minutes more and then have the long break then? Is that going to work? Is that all right? Can people stand 10 minutes more? Okay. If you were British, you would have left by now. I know two of you are, but you've got much better attention spans. With my students, I teach some of the time. With my students, they can stand about 40 minutes and then they're just gone. But the question that the lady over there asked about, there's more to it than that. So I've been sober almost 26 years, and you need to know I've had a lot of problems. I've had psychological problems. I came into AA mentally ill. I won't give you the list of suspected diagnoses, but I was not well. I've had difficult problems with my family. I'll give you an idea of one practical problem I had once. I was the finance director, this was many years ago, the finance director of one of the dot-coms. And if anyone remembers the dot-com bubble, this was not a comfortable, stable, slow position. This was the Wild West. The business we were running was doubling in size every 3 months. We were spending £250,000 per month more than we were receiving. We were constantly having to bring in new investment. And the type of problem that I had was, it's 3:00 on Friday afternoon. We need to pay 150 people at 5:00. I'm £200,000 short. That would be 1 million shekels. I've got 2 hours to find 1 million shekels, and I have a telephone. This is, by any stretch of the imagination, this is a problem. Difficulties in my relationship with my other half, lots of my family has mental health problems. Huge difficulties in AA, huge difficulties in service. I can say that right now, today, I have no remaining problems in my life. There are situations, there are no remaining problems, which means that every problem I've had in 26 years has been solved. How has it been solved? The answer is always in the traditions or the concepts or the steps. And where I find the traditions and the concepts most useful, I find the traditions immensely useful in sponsoring other people, and I find, and it obviously in my home group, but also in my home life. The concepts are a way of how do you organise getting something done when there's more than one person in the room. So you've got people who are decision makers, you have people that take action. How are you going to balance that? How is authority going to get delegated from the top of the organisation to the bottom? And a friend of mine works for one of the crazier American banks. I'm not going to say which one or even give a clue, but it's crazy. And he's been in banking for over 20 years. He's very experienced. He came into AA in 1999, I believe. And he has lots of questions about the dysfunction of the organisation he works in. He's in charge of a lot of money, he's in charge of a lot of people. We have not found one problem in his workplace which has not been solved by application of the traditions and the concepts, and he is completely, on a good day, at peace. So you want to know why we're talking about the traditions and the concepts, is because these problems, I believe, will solve whatever is going on they've solved whatever is going on in my life. We'll come to some examples later. I've missed out most of what I wanted to say, and I think it's time to have some food. So, Baraka, would you like to help us close with the Serenity Prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.